subtle things and make them feel super comfortable, but rather being really open and honest about how the state of things so that we can move forward towards a better future. Compassion comes from the fact that I have often felt like the narrative around diversity and inclusion is this weird conversation where like, we have completely tokenized people of color and we are not able to see them as individual. And what makes us different is that we take this conversation and we bring it as like an individual and interpersonal take on these matters. So it feels like it's, nitty gritty work, but really it means that we're pushing back the question to the person rather to the system. So we know that the system, we live in the white supremacy, we know that there's consequences to that, but then we turn back the accountability to the individual so that we highlight how we can make a difference as individual. And in this space particularly is really interesting because this is an academic setting. So, in theory, you are the minds of tomorrow. And if we don't start here, where should we start? And it's kind of like expanding our minds where we're able to see how others are thinking, how others are feeling, so that we are able to not necessarily know, I can never feel what another person feels, but have a perspective that's like a window into something that we like never looked into.
Mm-hmm. Yes, a lot of our work centers on decentering the white lens and this idea of getting away from white centrality. So like Yseult mentioned, putting the emphasis and the responsibility back on the individual instead of intellectualizing these issues and talking about systems. Yseult and I are in a cross-racial business as business partners and as friends. And we feel like our relationship is a microcosm for a lot of the times what's happening cross-racially in our society. We in our relationship have to be constantly aware of the power dynamics between us, what it means for me to be a white woman, what it means for her to be a Black woman, what it means for both of us to be Jewish women. And for me, as the white ally in this, or the white partner in this, I never call myself an ally. Even if we're on the journey of allyship, we think it's really important for white or non-Black people of color to recognize that you don't get to be an ally unless the person or group you're trying to be an ally to says that you're being an ally. And an allyship badge doesn't exist. There is no heroism in allyship. It's about the constant unlearning, deconditioning of white supremacy within all of us. So we'd love to make that distinction. I think allyship is a hot topic, anti-racism is a hot topic, and allyship is not a blanket statement. If you are an ally to the LGBTQ community or working on your allyship there, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're an ally to all groups. You could be working on your allyship on different paths, in different ways, at different levels. So we ask everyone to take that lens of, it's a lifelong journey. With allyship and anti-racism work, there is no point of arrival. It's constantly changing and it's never a static thing. So we'd like to presence that now, because allyship is something that I know everyone is mostly here to aspire to be, but we'd like to say that you never actually arrive.
Right. And it's also up to the group that you're trying to be an ally to that has to recognize you as an ally, because I think that we live in a time where like labels are really, really fun and people love to put labels and big catchy words. But at the end of the day, we have lost the need to put kind of like like what it actually means and what it actually looks like to be an ally. And to be an ally means to be in discomfort absolutely all the time. It's to be able to stand up when something is really uncomfortable and be able to speak up. And we speak to people that work in corporate environments. So like we talk about people that are already in working environments or whatever. And like we talk about how you can be like a coworker and be an ally. And how can you show your allyship in the space of like work. And I think I went to university as well. And I studied specifically interpersonal communication, which is funny because that has to do with how the take of what we do with Kinswomen. But I remember encountering a lot of situations where I felt like there was no allyship whatsoever in my classrooms, where there was no allyship from students to students and also from faculty to students, or vice versa. So the dynamic of it was that, you know, it reflected the societal kind of like status of things, and I didn't feel like I had space to we were in a space of learning and growing and intellect and thinking together and feeling supported in moments where the professor said something really weird or another student said something weird. Because I think that, you know, all people of color, and when we use the word people of color, by the way, we're really inclusive in that term. It's people of color that are like brown and, you know, black, and also Asian and Indian, and people that are passing as white, and or people that have conditional whiteness are absolutely a part of that POC. And what does that look like as a student, and in experiencing that the environment of being a person of color in a space where, in a society that's predominantly white, you know?
Mm-hmm. I think white people feel like there needs to be people of color around for them to be an ally. But when you're in an, you know, all white space, for example, you can do so much really important anti-racism work in talking about whiteness. What does whiteness mean? You can demand that your teachers, that your managers, that your partner, that your family members start bringing anti-racism work into their own personal journeys. As white people, we need to, I think unfortunately, under white supremacy, there are hierarchies everywhere, especially in a place like a university or a workplace. So like Yseult said, that's where it gets really uncomfortable, when we have to disrupt these hierarchies and go to our bosses or go to our professors and say, I demand better. We need to do better. And in allyship, there's no cookies or pats on the back. So true allyship, true anti-racism work, I feel like has the ego removed from it completely. You're not doing this to feel like a good white person. You're not doing it to appear like a good white person from people of color and get their approval and their absolution. You're doing it because it's absolutely the right thing to do. And we live in an extremely unbalanced society where we've been poisoned and diseased by white supremacy. And in order to see the truth, we have a lot of work to do. Largely, these are white people caused problems. And so therefore they are white problems to solve. And allies need community. So I hope all of you guys here feel like you have community either at school or in the clubs at SEPA, because allyship can't be done alone. Again, going back to the ego and this idea of heroism, we need community to not only help us in our anti-racism work, but to keep us accountable, to keep the focus off the individual hero. So those are other things that we like to surface when we're talking about anti-racism work.
Yeah, before we were invited to take space into this conversation, we were told that SEPA is a very diverse and international kind of space. And I find that really interesting and like kind of like a richness to be in as a student. I studied in America as an international student, so I am aware of what that dynamic looks like and feels like, and how it can be like kind of, you know, when you're an international student, you're coming to America and you hear all these like racial issues and you feel kind of like distant from like these issues, and you think like, okay, well, this is an American issue and I kind of have nothing to do with it. But at the end of the day, because this is like an interpersonal conversation, like we go into relation with people around us. Like, even though we come from different countries and we come into America, and America has its own like societal issues and struggles, these are not things that are specific to America. These are not dynamics that are specific to here only, and they show differently in different places. And so like I always really focus on the fact that, you know, I've had people that ask me like, you're not even African American, why do you care? But I'm a Black person living in America. And so no one in the street can really say like, you're not African American, you are a person from the continent that grew up in Europe. But at the end of the day, I am Black in America. And so this is part of my story. And if you're from somewhere in Europe and you're white, you are in America and you will be perceived as a white person. And so you live under these privileges or these struggles that people from here are experiencing. And so we can't shy away and become distant. And so the allyship aspect of it, when you are an international student, I think translates, and being able to be there and understand the story around who's around us and what they're experiencing, even if it's not specifically our story, it is the story that you are ultimately part of the second you decide to come and study in an institution here in the United States. And so it's like really important to think of like the allyship idea. What does it look like when you are an international student? Like where do you place yourself in that dynamic? And maybe you're going to be a voice that's silent at the beginning because it is overwhelming, or maybe you're going to be someone that takes part, but you should never feel shy away, because I feel like sometimes some people have tried to shame me into like, why do you care? Why are you doing this? You're not American. But at the same time, it's like, I live in America, I am a Black woman, and I care because as a Black woman, I know that I can live in Europe. I will experience the same thing as, like, to a certain extent that African Americans are experiencing here in America. So it's like, it's really important to take part and be part of that allyship. And on a human level, it's, you know, you like to know that the person next to you cares. And this is not a professional space. This is an academic space. And so understanding the perspective of someone else just can enrich your idea or perception of things when you are learning about them, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for sharing that, Yseult. I wanted to just check in and see how you guys are doing. If you want to share in the chat box or raise your hand. We're here. We always say we expect awkward silences when we talk about race, and it's just part of the journey and process of these conversations.
It's part of the magic. Yes,
definitely. Yseult's a Scorpio, so she loves the uncomfortable dynamics. I wanted to get into, share a little bit about my own journey as an ally, and the journey that I'm on right now and will forever be on. I think what I've learned most is that it's so important for me as a white person to be vulnerable and transparent about my own shortcomings, and also about where I'm at as an ally. I believe in learning in public and failing in public, and what we do on our podcast and through our platform and classes, I try to be super transparent about how normal it is for white people to mess up, and this idea that we're going to be experts on race relations is a lie. So sometimes white people, they read White Fragility or they attend one seminar and they feel really confident about talking about race, but we really don't know anything. It really takes years and years to undo our own white supremacy internally. And one commitment that I've made to myself, I have an allyship mission statement for myself, and we encourage all of our students in our classes to do this. But there's this impulse. White people want to know, what can I do? I want to fix racism. We can only be responsible for the racism within ourselves, and how that appears in our interpersonal dynamics, in our language, and what we consume, and how we treat others. With Yseult and I like to share this story because it reveals how deeply entrenched this hierarchy of whiteness. We were working with a brand, a white fashion-owned brand, about partnering with them. And one of the reasons that we wanted to work with them was because we'd seen them do anti-racism work and be very transparent about their values. That's one of the things that we work for and that we look for in the people that we work with is, are your anti-racism values transparent on your website, on your social media? Are, to your friends, you can't be shy about your anti-racism work. I think you have to wear your values on your sleeve when it comes to this. But one of the things that I had said to these white business owners was, I really appreciate how you've been helping people of color in the past few years with your brand. And afterwards, Yseult and I got on the phone and she said, do you realize that you said the word helping people of color? Why is it helping people of color, but collaborating with white people? And it was one of those moments where I felt really grateful that we had trust built up between us, where she could tell me those things. And it also reveals all the work that I still need to do, because the racism is so insidious and it comes through in our language, even if we think we're being positive or we don't intend. In our work, we prioritize the impact over intention a lot. And that's always key. We can never rest on meaning well, we have to do well. And something I just mentioned about the trust. Oftentimes when, last year, white people had this racial awakening and we had this reckoning and we felt like, okay, I'm ready to do the work. Like, I'm ready to talk to people of color. I'm ready for people of color to come into my space. And we felt like just because we were ready, that people of color would come to us. We work with white coaches, white business owners are like, how do we diversify our audience? It's like, well, just because you're ready doesn't mean that you've built up any trust between the communities that you want to bring into your space. And going back to the relationship between Yseult and I as a Black woman and as a white woman, our trust is built on consistency, constant communication, and time. And building relationships don't happen overnight. If you think about relationships that you have with your best friend or with your romantic partner, they didn't become deep and close and trusting overnight. And I think we need to have the same kind of respect for the time that it takes to build trust cross-racially too.
Yeah. I like to come back to the fact that, you guys being students, there's like this weird dynamic when because I studied here in America, I paid full tuition, and I grew up in Belgium. School is practically free in Belgium. So the difference in cost is kind of phenomenal. And I find it so interesting to give back the power to students. For you guys to be in a situation where you understand that even if you are learning, and you are in a place where you're growing intellectually or in your academic career, you're still the person that's paying to be there. And the reason I'm saying that is because, like, for example, I have a little brother right now that's at Parsons, and this is his second semester. And as he's entering his second semester, we have a conversation of what happened on his first semester. And he explains to me that he spent so much time having to have one-on-one conversation with his teachers about, things that they said that were really uncomfortable. It's not up to, the burden doesn't go on to students that are either international or like of color to have to teach teachers what to do or how to act in this situation. And the only reason why I'm talking about this also is like to reposition like kind of like the dynamic, this weird dynamic where like these big institutions have claimed themselves to be like prestigious and everything, but then like we're still the ones who are paying so much money to be there. And so we should have an education that like kind of highlights things that we either want to have a conversation about or that is reflecting of things that we should be talking about for when you enter like a working space or whatever. And so my little brother enters college, and here he is having to have conversation with his teachers and having to teach them. And they tell him, oh, you should come and sit with me and you should teach me. What should I do? They're talking to an 18-year-old kid that just recently finished high school, and he doesn't know. And he told him, I'm paying school for you to teach me. I'm not here to teach you. Because it's as if like I'm paying to be, in a place of paying for tuition, and I'm giving you a degree as well. Because I'm working and I'm paying also to be in this space. And the only reason why it's important to replace this dynamic is because I think that a lot of the time we find ourselves caught up in this prestige and this like kind of like power dynamic that stops us from questioning the things that are being told to us, from questioning the books that we're reading, the authors that are being offered to us, the conversation that we're having, the things that teachers are saying, and or the reaction that the other students are having. And so being able to place ourselves differently, I think, will invite people to feel more comfortable that you deserve to question the system that you're in, either it being in the work environment or the institution. And it doesn't matter what institution, because you're paying so much money to be there that you deserve to question whoever is in front of you to justify the diploma at the end. And that's just that's how I see it. That's my vision in regards to education here in America. Because I was here, because I studied here, and because I saw what happened in this like power dynamic of wanting to feel like, oh, I have to walk in the lane and I can't question too much and I can't be problematic. And I feel like if there's anywhere where you have to be problematic and where you have to have a critical thinking, it's absolutely in an academic environment. Because if you don't do it there, then it's almost where I have personally gained strength and motivation to be able to come out and ask absolutely everything that I want, or like question everything that's going on around me in the real world, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that like it's a dynamic that I like to point out when we are talking to students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't get easier when you're in a corporate setting and you're being paid and you feel like you have something on the line, something to lose. I think in allyship, there's always, you can't look at it as always something to lose, but you can't think about it as something to gain, besides just more humanity. But I want to go over to the comments really quick and just acknowledge Miriam. Thank you for catching that. She said, I noticed you, Hannah, just did something that I often catch myself as a white person doing too, saying they when we mean we when talking about white people. Thank you. Language is so important, so I appreciate you pointing that out to me. And then another member, Sarah, says, how can white leaders make this move from intention to action? Referencing how anti-racism statements from corporations has meaning but doesn't have tangible impact. Yeah, so wow, we saw so much of this last summer, and honestly, it was so maddening. Companies that I used to work for, I worked in corporate America for 12 years. It was such a problematic space. And then of course they come out and they're like, we are anti-racist. And it's like, not really, you're not. And we were working with another brand this past year who came out with a very powerful anti-racism statement, hired Yseult and I to do some writing for them. Now you can't find their anti-racism statement anywhere on their site. The writing that we do for them is buried. So I think, Sarah, to your question, white leaders clearly are not incentivized to continue doing this work, despite the threat of reputational repercussions or financial repercussions. It's not centered to them. And we saw so much like reflexive, desperate activism happen last year. But going back to what I was saying about building trust and the consistency, we need to hold our leaders accountable by demanding consistency, by demanding transparency, demanding honesty. Where are they in all their promises that they've made? Why aren't they on the website? Why aren't they front and center? What kinds of work are they doing on their own anti-racism journey? I've had some really hard conversations with former bosses and friends and colleagues where I've gone to them and said, hey, you're not doing enough. And those conversations are not easy. I usually feel like I'm going to throw up. I'm so nervous. But I also know that, somebody needs to hold them accountable. And if they're white, unfortunately, they're going to probably listen to white people. They're more likely to listen to white people. So that's where the white responsibility comes in, and the white community, and being allies together, and holding white leaders accountable.
Yeah. There's like really interesting reaction in the, I think that's Melanie responding to you, yeah. It's so unfair, the labor that is expected of people of color to teach white faculty, especially given the power imbalance that exists in the faculty-student relationship. It's a scary to speak your truth to white folks who can turn around and deny your narrative, your lived experience, and thus your humanity. Yes, Melanie, I absolutely agree with you. It is. And that's why, when we do this work, I invite people that are white or, benefit from whiteness or conditional whiteness to be able to step up and not look away. And it's like, it portrays itself in, small comments in classrooms, or, the teacher saying something really weird that has no place to be said. And I think that it really takes the white students to be able to step up and say something. And at the end of the day, as a Black student, or Black student particularly, because here we're talking about Black person, but you don't feel comfortable because you're scared that your grade is going to take you don't know if your grade is going to be affected. You don't know if like the teacher is going to start being weird with you or whatever. And like as a white student, it's that's just not the dynamic, like, because you're a majority and they can't start doing that with everyone that's like the majority of the room. So it's really important for white people to be able to step up and support people of color. And I really emphasize on the idea of people of color being people that seem of color and that pass as white as well, because I've been in a lot of situations where people said anti-Semitic things, but no one said anything or didn't want to say anything because they either couldn't see it or they felt too uncomfortable to speak up about it. But at the end of the day, when we decide to be an ally, I always say that you cannot tokenize a group. You can't decide to be with the group that is the most visibly a minority. You have to want to stand up for every single thing that feels like uncomfortable or wrong, especially academic. Like I just don't think it's right for in an academic setting for things like that to fly. Like it has to be picked up because you're paying a lot of money to be there, and there's no way you should let that go. It's not like when you're working at an office where you're getting paid at the end of the month. Here you are having to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to be able to finish your semester. So it's like the dynamic is not, and as a white person, I think that this is the opportunity where you build up that courage. Like if you feel like you don't have the courage to speak up, this is it, And we have we do a class, and we were talking about this, about standing up and knowing where we stand in this matter. And one of our clients said that she wasn't sure and she didn't know, and I told her, I personally cannot choose for you, but we decide where we want to stand in history. We decide where we want to stand as a legacy, individual legacy, and so like, where do I want to stand myself, and knowing that like something really weird happened and I didn't say anything. And because racism or anti-Semitism, xenophobia is such a heavy and emotional space to be in, it's something that you really have to take on where you are in that space. And so you start where you are and you address things where you are at your own level. And I think a lot of the things that we see with our clients or students is that they often feel like they have to fix everything. They have to fix it. They have to find a solution, and things need to like change. And like, unfortunately, we live in a system that really, really favors whiteness and it affects every single environment, like companies or like any industry is affected by racism. Like racism is just present everywhere. And so it's really important to know that like in one conversation or one interaction, you can't change things. And so you address it where you are, either with yourself and learning more, or the people around you, or your friends, or making sure you diversify your conversation. And and one other thing that I was having a conversation with a friend of mine that's studying global health as a master in Canada. And, she was telling me how her institution was very, very diverse. It's like, oh, basically white people are a minority. She's white. And she was telling me like, basically white people are a minority in our program. It's like so diverse. There's people from everywhere in the world. And then she was telling me the things that she noticed in class. And I said, you see, this is it. It's like we're talking about culture, and then like, what is the culture? So like you have a culture around like a setting where people are, it's almost like a room. You have a room that's decorated, there's like paintings all around it, and people are in the middle. Like the decor doesn't reflect on the people, and the people doesn't reflect on the decor. So it's not because you have like 50 people in the room that are from all around the world, and you have like this like palette of people, that it means that the environment in which you are is opening doors to conversation to make things different. It doesn't mean that the system and the fiber of the institution is really opening up to make like intellectual conversation about these like issues that we have in society. So it's like being able to not tokenize the fact that like, but there's like in my class, I'm the only but white person. It's like, yeah, but what is the system? Is the classroom open to talking about things that are really uncomfortable? Is the teacher saying racist or anti-Semitic things, or or really like sexist things? If there are, it means that the environment in which you are is giving space for that speech. There's something that's there that's making things comfortable for them to be able to say that. And so that's what you tackle. You don't look at who's in the room, but rather like, what is the temperature of the room, rather.
Yeah. We were talking to a guest yesterday, and she talked about her frustration. She was a Black woman who talked about the frustration of representation for representation's sake. And representation is important, but it doesn't mean that the power dynamics have shifted at all, like Yseult said, and I love that analogy that you said about the room. We can't also, as white people, look towards people of color's presence and make that, proof, and look for proof that it is an anti-racist space. If there is diversity, we have to be looking at the bones and the tone and who created that structure and who built it, and how close to whiteness it is. And something I want to share too is Yseult saying, you don't have to fix anything. I think the most impact that we can have are with those people closest to us. And in white groups, we can't assume that even if we have left-leaning, liberal friends, parents, partners, that they are on the same page as we are, or that they don't still have, reflexive racism, conditioned bias, all of the things that exist inside of us as white people. We know that 55% of white people voted for Trump. Those are our people. We're responsible for them. They're people that we know, they're our friends, or people who didn't share with us. We can never assume that the people closest to us feel the same way they do. We do, even if, they do all the right, quote unquote, liberal, left-leaning, open-minded, woke things. Those can be the hardest conversations to have. And that's why, sometimes we get questions about, well, I don't want to talk about this with my white friends. It's like talking into an echo chamber. I think there's this myth of this echo chamber that we're all on the same page, and that we all, are moving towards anti-racism and allyship, when really that's not the case at all. That's not the case at all. So some of the most impactful ways we can change our environment and do anti-racism work is talking to the people at our dinner tables, talking to our partners, all the people that we assume are on the right side of things. I think we can have a lot of impact there. And the only way to, I say, like, fine tune your allyship antenna and when I say allyship intent, I mean this idea of the more you educate yourself, the more you decolonize yourself as a white person, you can start to see and witness all the ways that you're perpetuating that whiteness in your own life, in your own interactions, in your companies, in your schools, in your book clubs, you know, who you follow on social media. But all that work has to be done on your own interpersonally. I don't burden Izu with, you know, all the work, expecting her to teach me everything. I know that that responsibility is on me. Okay, we have a lot going on in the chat box. Yeah, go for it.
The chat box is like interesting. I going to comment on the conditional whiteness because it came up. I think I don't know if I'm saying her name right. Kiara, but I'm not sure if it's Kiara or Kiara. So conditional whiteness basically applies to people that are white but with condition until they kind of open up on the fact that they're not white. And so this is how this is what I mean when I say conditional whiteness. And so, for example, Jewish people are white until they're not white. So they benefit from whiteness because of seeming white. They have this closeness to whiteness, and that's just like a truth. But the second they come out as claiming their Jewishness, either through their culture or their religion, it becomes an issue. And so then it becomes, oh, you're not one of us. It's like you're one of us until you're not one of us, if that makes sense. So one of them is like Jewish communities, and also people that, you know, I have friends that are of color but seem really, really white. And so until people know that they're mixed, or, you know, they're not 100% white, or they don't have like, you know, full whiteness, then it becomes a different kind of like discomfort, or, you know, they experience weird situation. Yeah, it can apply to white Latinx folks as well. Absolutely. It's just people that, like, white people will feel comfortable until they know that they're not completely white, either through culture, religion, and also like, you know, that they're mixed or whatever.
I want to bring up Sylvie's question. Sylvie, you said, regarding professional anti-racism teaching such as this, how do we reconcile white people profiting off of anti-racist work when the income stems from anti-Black racism? Both in this partnership and also examples like Robin DiAngelo, who's living easy and rich, profiting from racism. I think that's such a great question. I think, you know, Robin DiAngelo, unfortunately, she's a white woman who wrote White Fragility. A lot of times white people can only enter anti-racism work through other white people. That's the really depressing, unfortunate fact, is that white people are more likely to listen to other white people at first. I read Robin DiAngelo's book. I was recommended it by a Black woman who said, you must read this. And I've heard so many sides of this conversation, because my hope is that after reading White Fragility, white people then seek out other Black educators, and they're on their, if that's what they needed to get them on the path to their anti-racism allyship journey, they're there. And then there's this idea that she is profiting off of it. I have such mixed feelings about this. I would like to believe in abundance mentality, but I know that's a super privileged thing to say. I think we also, there are plenty of white people doing terrible things in this world, making a lot of money, and we don't question them. I've had white friends question me doing this work, and they will try to emphasize the ways that they're bringing anti-racism into their very capitalist, very inherently white professions as a way to, I guess, make themselves feel better. But they expect to be paid for their work and what they're contributing to society. But when it comes to racism, they don't think that really anybody should be paid for their time or their effort when it comes to white people doing this work. So I think it's nuanced. I mean, I struggle with this question all the time. Izu and I have certainly talked about it, and it comes up in our business partnership, but I feel like it often comes up from white people.
Yeah. I mean, I don't feel right when a white person is teaching anti-racism work, because there's such an insight, like when they're teaching alone. It works in collaboration the way Hannah and I do it, because I'm so upfront and I'm so forward about when Hannah is like not seeing it, there's like a perspective of things that she's not seeing. We were constantly having these conversations, and sometimes it's uncomfortable, and sometimes we like we never fight, but it's really like I'm very upfront about the things that are happening and the conversation that we're having. But when I see white people alone teaching about anti-racism, I find that completely absurd. Just because there's an insight that a white person does not have. There's just things that you won't see. And I see it in like the work that we do with people that we speak to. Is we can have the most well-intentioned white people, and we can have the most well-intentioned like women that want to do better, but there's these little things that you don't notice. Hannah gave an example earlier when it's like she said help instead of collaboration. It's like these tiny little moments that actually are a telltale on how someone is seeing a dynamic. And so as a white person, like I can't believe that you have had enough time in your life to be able to really have these insights. And so I have white friends and I have friends from all over the world, but we are in a situation where I'm constantly teaching them my perspective, my perspective of life, or like teaching them things that they won't see. And the most people that we see, they're not raging, racist. It's rather people that you would put in the middle as being like good people, but at the same time like they say problematic things. So we find ourselves in problematic situation, or they feel offended, or they're fragile about like talking about something that like I have experienced, and they want, we had a client tell us, but we really have to see things. I was talking about, as a person that's doing work anti-racism as a white person, you can't surround yourself people that are not in par with how you're trying to move forward in that allyship journey. And so I said, you have to part ways with certain people, not keep them just because they're your childhood friend from like the village you grew up in. And so like at the end of the day, you have to make a decision who you decide to have around you. And so she felt kind of like, it felt really bizarre to her that I was saying you can't keep everyone around you. You can't sit with everyone in order to like really be in that space that you want to make a change. Because for me, if you say that you're trying to be an ally, but I know you're friends with this person that's like super problematic, saying racist things or whatever, like how am I going to feel about you? And so she felt as though I was being like, I was separating and I wasn't letting people in. But at the end of the day, it's like, as a white person, you cannot save your friends. You can't save everyone. What you can do is by live, do what you have to do, and then show example so that people start acting like you maybe. Or maybe they get interested in the books that you're reading. And then you surround yourself, not people that you're going to feel so much like more woke than them, but rather people that are going to challenge you and like put you in a place where you're constantly challenged and growing and evolving into that space. And that's such a much more uncomfortable place to be honest, than to be with your friends that just don't get it and that you're the only one that gets it. And so it wasn't about separating yourself and closing off people, but it was rather like focusing on being in spaces that are inviting that change and that growth, So that's how I feel about that. I saw Shani said something about white people who claim identities that do not apply to them, Rachel Dolezal, Jessica Grote, and others who haven't identified. I mean, Shani, to be honest with you, that's completely absurd, and it's so problematic because it's tokenizing and dehumanizing us as people, and it's kind of like taking everything that they want from like that they fetishize of us, and kind of like rolling with what makes them like feel cool. I feel like it's almost like that hot jacket that came out last season that everyone wants. And it's like, and then you're going to use it, but then you have this like opportunity to like kind of leave that space when you want, where we don't have that space of like being able to leave that space when we want. We are in it, we're born in it, and we're in it forever. And so yeah, it's absolutely disgusting if you ask me.
Mm-hmm. Lots of talk about Robin DiAngelo. Yeah.
But there's someone that asked about like, how does, so Urbano asked, do you ever go back and speak to your clients, corporate and non-corporate, about how interventions have and have not made a difference? When there are positive results and they're tangible, measurable, how? While I understand that every corporate educational culture is different, I wonder if you can give us some insight on the best practices at the structural level within companies, schools. Thanks. That's a great question.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Anna, do you want to take over? Or do you...
Yeah, sure. So most of the companies that we've been working with are just at the very beginning of their anti-racism journey and have only started to implement anti-racist practices within their company. And it's not a quick fix and it doesn't happen overnight. But we have seen small but very meaningful changes, I would say. We never want people to, I feel like a lot of companies at first, they try to do all those like good inclusive things where they're checking a box like, we're going to use inclusive language, we're going to do land acknowledgements, we're going to put our pronouns and our signatures, and all of those things are great. But if they're more performative than not, then they don't really seep in and change the tone and the structure of the company. But from what we've seen, some of the people that we've worked with, we worked with an editor-in-chief of a major magazine, for example, who came to us. And now when we read that magazine, I absolutely see changes in who's hired, in what's covered, in who's on the cover. And, you know, while we think ultimately this editor-in-chief shouldn't necessarily she still has a lot of work to do, she is making small changes and she does have more awareness. So those are things that I think have ripple effects, even though she still has work to go. I'm trying to think of another client that we've worked with recently. That's, one of our art clients, I won't name who they are, but they're an organization for women who work in the art world. And since working with us, they've diversified their steering committee and their board. So we've seen changes like that. But what we would probably like to do is just check in 6 months from now and see where they're at then, while the pressure has kind of come off. What I found most encouraging is the people who are still coming to us now, because back in June, everyone was hiring anti-racism facilitators, and it's the people who have less pressure on them but still know it's the right thing to do who are coming into our space that I think are the most genuine and will probably have the most long-lasting allyship journey and impact in their spaces.
Yeah. I mean, working with people in this space, the way we go about it, for me, it's really tapping into like a window where they're like, wow, I never seen it like that. Because I really think that there's like some tokenism that come across, and people really, like white people particularly, really like choose where they want to be, who they want to listen to. And it's just like this like really like very comfortable space where they feel like they're comfortable, and then like there's no real growth that's being had. So we really focus on like putting light on how they see the world and how they perceive things around them. And we've worked with people like there's this one designer, she completely understood the idea. I really emphasize on the idea that like anti-racism work and allyship is something that has to become like a fiber. Like it has to be part of you every day. And I'm at our last talk, we were talking about this, and I said, like, one of the things that white people are amazing at is like committing at things that they really care about. And for example, like when they commit to like recycling, and they care about the animals and they care about the environment, or like they're really vegans and they go really hardcore, that, and then it becomes like the restaurants that they eat and the food that they eat and who they have around them, and like that passion and that commitment is something that we need to see come across when it is about humanity, when it's about a group dying for no other reason than the color of their skin, for a group like experiencing trauma for no other reason than not being white. And so like that's the commitment that I wish to see. So it's like it's bringing light to like how you perceive this conversation to begin with, as it being like this other problem. It's like it cannot be a problem that you're doing for us. It's not a problem that you're not saving us. Like people of color are amazing at advocating for themselves. We have seen it through history. We have seen it through the advocacy. We've saved the situations that were horrible in this country and around the world. And it's just like at the end of the day, there's accountability that has to be taken from white people to make this a daily thing, like the water that you drink every morning, like the gym membership that you've signed up for like the whole year, like that commitment, or the veganism that you are preaching to all your friends and like your community. That is the commitment that we want to see when it comes to xenophobia, anti-racism, or anti-Semitism as a whole. It's like you stand and you speak up about it every single time you can, you know. And I know that like I've been around vegans that are like so passionate that I can't talk about meat. You know, it's like, oh no, because, you know, and it's done in a light way. It's like, you should read this you should watch this documentary, you should read this book. It's like that casualty has to happen. And I know why it's not like that. I know it's because you have projected this issue as your own issue. And it's like you have to absolutely decenter yourself and then not make it your problem, but make it a problem that is of society that you have part in. You are part of the society. So I always say, as an ally, there's never a neutral stance. It's either your impact is negative or your impact is positive. And if it's positive, it's you are standing up every time something weird is happening. And for students, it's like speaking to that teacher that said something weird. I went to college here. I experienced so many situations that were problematic. And for the money I paid, that's ridiculous. And so I had no one around me to stand up for me and say, wow, that was weird, right? Not even like I'm changing the system in the school, but it's like being a friend and coming to me and say, are you okay? What happened? Like, can we do something about that? And like the openness about how overwhelming these situations are is also humanizing the person that's experiencing it. It's also seeing them as like not a quota and not a whole societal issue, but like this one moment where like I don't have the peace to just learn. As a Black woman in a space that's academic, or as a Jewish person or an Asian person, an Indian person, like whatever, it's like you don't have the space to just be in a moment where you're learning. You have to think about how to educate people, you know, and how to like uplift, or sometimes you say nothing because you're exhausted. So that's something to like keep in mind when it comes to advocacy and making allyship as like a fiber. And that's what we try to share with our clients. So it's, you know, review everything that you have in your life and try to make sure that it's relevant to that idea.
Okay, I want to get to Fariha's question from a couple minutes ago. Sometimes when I'm discussing anti-racism work with white colleagues, I feel like we get stuck at the point where they are now realizing that they need to face how to be an anti-racist as a whole person, whereas I, as a brown woman, have been doing that work my whole life. How do I move that conversation forward?
I'm sorry. I was reading in the, like there's a lot happening in the.
Fariha, if you can, I would love for you to just share a little bit more what you mean, because I want to make sure we answer your question the best we can.
I think I want to go to Akshika question.
Oh wait, Fariha, I think she wants to speak.
Oh, she said she can't unmute herself.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, so maybe you can
I'm good. Thank you.
Oh, good.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, hi. Again, thank you for coming. Like, all this conversation is very important, and it's nice to have a space other than my own head to be having this. Yeah, so I'll actually like give you a little background. I'm on the university senate, and we're trying to develop some sort of space for anti-education resources and looking at like what an anti-racist policy looks like across Columbia University. And most of my colleagues in this group are white. So a lot of our discussions are around, I'll like repeat my question a little bit, but it's like, you know, they're like, yeah, like this work has to be done. And like, we need to confront how like we haven't been doing this work in everyday life. And I like express this to them too, but I don't want to shut down people when we're having these conversations of like what it means to be anti-racist. And I'm also not saying that like I know how to be anti-racist, right? Like that's why I'm also doing my own work, but it's like, how do I do it as a person of color while also speaking to people who are white and like approach it differently than I do?
I think you're trying to play on two chairs, and you're sitting on one chair. You are a woman of color, period. I think you need to come from that space and be honoring that voice and your experience. And at the end of the day, it's like it's so hard to be at a place where you're trying to juggle two positions, where at the end of like you say you don't know how to be an anti-racist, but you do. You know what it feels like to be in a space that doesn't make you feel excluded. Like the work that we do with Hannah, it's like I'm not talking from a place where I've gone to a school or university that's taught me like anti-racism work. I just know what it feels like to enter a room and to know immediately that people are looking at you weird, or like, you know, a comment or a backhanded compliment, or like, you know, all these little things are things that we grow in, and it's trauma that we have like built up. And it's kind of like looking at your trauma and figuring out how you can like verbalize that and be like, this is my experience and this is what you shouldn't do. You know, I don't think that you need to actually like find a way to like manage them and manage you, because, you know, that's such a burden, especially if it's not, you know, that's not like your main thing. Like you're supposed to be growing together, they're supposed to be doing their work. And I think that it comes with like, there's like this laziness that comes with this work from white people sometimes, where they expect the person of color to teach them. But this is not new. There's so much intellectual people that have been talking about this forever. Like there's books, there's documentaries, there's people that speak up, there's so much. And even if they just listen to you, even if they quiet and listen to your narrative, they will hear what actually you're saying. And I think that that's really what it is. It's like placing yourself in a way that like your voice is authentic, your voice is real, and you do know what anti-racism is. And so implementing like what you've experienced and then learning what other minorities might be experiencing so that your input is like richer, that's how you do what you're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. I do want to read the question of Akshika. I hope I say your name right. Akshika said, someone may have already asked this. As students of color, how do we balance protecting our emotional health with us essentially educating mostly white faculty? Follow up, how can non-Black POC students meaningfully stand with our Black peers beyond personal messages? Man, I am a fervent believer in therapy for people of color and for anyone, but especially for people of color. And I think that like it's protecting your mental and emotional well-being should be number one. It's number one thing that you have to do. because at the end of the day, our sanity is all we have. And this is a reality that we can't tap out of. And so making sure that we have the bandwidth, that we have the energy or the well-being, mental and spiritual, mental and physical, to be able to deal with this is really, really important. And like one of the things that I try to emphasize, and it's so funny because a lot of the people that come into our space have never perceived it like that, but like what people of color experience in the white supremacy is trauma. It's trauma. And it's like, we know how to talk about trauma when it's like other people's trauma. But for some reason, when it's a person of color, they're supposed to know it. They're supposed to just know how to rebound. They're supposed to know how to be okay. They shouldn't be depressed because it's so common, it's so everyday, but like not everyone deals with this the same way. And so it's also learning when to step away and let people do what they're supposed to be doing. Like not always taking that, that wanting to like teach people. Like I even with the work that I do not permit people to contact me, especially people that are white. I do not let them contact me on my private time about this work. They cannot. It's like I already put my energy into this space professionally. I give my heart and I give my brain into this space. And it's like when I leave this space, unless you're a person of color and you want to find solace and you want to have a conversation and exchange, I do not want to have this conversation because I know that I am not the only resource. I cannot be tokenized. I am not doing and saying anything that has never been said before. Other people of color have said what we're saying. We've decided to say it differently because we want to put the accountability on the individual and not just the society, right? And not put their hands up in the air and be like, oh yeah, this is, I'm just part of this and I have no power in this,
We have a lot of good questions and we're gonna try to get to all of them. I'm going to scroll up to Karen's. Karen, you said, I hear the message that comments on white people who want to take action and that we need to educate ourselves. That's not the responsibility of Black people to educate us. I think that often puts white people who want to be allies in the position of wanting to act as allies, but afraid to say or do the wrong thing because we don't want to offend and rub people the wrong way. So that shuts down a conversation before it's even started. And today I'm learning criticism about books like White Fragility, which is one of the books that's been recommended on lists to learn more. So what should we do? How do you respond to this? As an ally, Karen, you will rub people the wrong way. As a white person in this space, like I'm never going to make every person of color happy. As an ally, you're never going to make every person of color happy. My motto is do the least harm possible. And doing the least harm possible means having the most information as possible and educating yourself to the best of your abilities. I would say read White Fragility, but also read Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad. Read So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. Read Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. There are so many, many resources, and you need to diversify the voices that you hear from. Only reading White Fragility or only reading How to Be an Anti-Racist is really just going to give you tunnel vision. You need to read a diversity of books by people of color, if that's how you read best, or listen to podcasts. Don't just listen to one Black voice. Don't just listen to one white voice that you agree with. Read things that trigger you, that you don't agree with. I say take in as much as you possibly can. Then you'll be less likely to offend or rub people the wrong way, but also that's still just part of the allies journey. I hope that's helpful.
And I think it's really important also as a white person to be able to like decenter yourself into that space. Like the whole idea of not saying the right thing is bizarre to me because it sits in the idea that you're supposed to be super expert in something that you are learning about, right? That you're tapping into newly or you're discovering or like you're on your journey. Yeah. So like, why is it that you are like, as a Black woman, when I'm talking about this with white people, I never expect them to be on point 100% and not make error. Like I expect them to be to rub me the wrong way, to say things that are gonna bother me, to be annoyed. Like I know this, I know it happens, right? And it's just like permitting yourself to take away that expertise sense is like going to be the first step to like kind of admitting that you don't understand it, you don't get it, And it's like, and then you find your community of white people with whom you don't get it together, and you grow together in order to figure it out together, so that you don't come to me when you're in the early stage of like discovering, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so problematic. This is like the minimizing of the harm. It's like, you take time to grow within and like discover, read, and do as much work as possible, and you don't expect to be an expert. It's like, it's a growth. And also, like I always say, it's really important to say that you don't know. Like saying, hey, I don't know, I suck at this and I'm learning, is part of like, I'm gonna feel more comfortable around you, because then I know that you're really honest with yourself, and you're not going to come in and act like you know what you're doing, because this is a journey. Like, that's why we talk about journey. It's a journey. It's like something that you're going to grow in, and you have to implement, and there's no badges. And I think that this is the idea of like, at some point someone's going to come over and give you like a badge of like, now you're an ally. It's like, that's never going to happen. What's going to happen is that you're going to create an environment around you that's going to be so much more comfortable for people of color. And that's something that I know what it feels like. When you're around people that are just aware and having these conversations, it's like less uncomfortable. It means that you're going to hire differently. It means that you're going to decide to work in certain spaces, have certain friends, and it shows, it comes across. But that whole expertise idea is just, we're experts. We are the experts, and you're supposed to be on the journey of trying to understand things and trying to be there for the other,
There are lots of great book recommendations happening right now. And I want to scroll up to another question from Akshika. Are there steps we can advocate for to ensure faculty don't retaliate when BIPOC students try to have these critical conversations? I think absolutely. We don't know the inner workings of Columbia, but because students are the majority, I would say that's where the power should lie. And if there's, I don't know, a contract or an agreement that can be written up to ensure no retaliation, a non-retaliation policy probably exists somewhere in like HR or admissions, but whether it's in practice or not, or whether it actually means anything, is another question. So putting the meat behind that and making sure that that is clear is something that needs to be done internally. But I would use, a mass, get as many people together as allies, maybe draft something and get them to commit to that. Because that would be key, but also define what retaliation means, because retaliation, you guys can't get fired from Columbia as far as I know, but it might be really subtle. So in retaliation, I would work with your BIPOC groups and decide what that might look like. If it's subtle, like microaggressions, so that the faculty knows exactly what retaliatory behavior looks like, because if it's not clear, they might continue to perpetuate it.
This is like the most interactive
chat. Thank you so much for all of your feedback, and sorry if we're not getting to every single comment. You guys can always email us too, which we'll put in the chat box. Karen, you said you're the experts and usually the one learns from experts, but you have said it's not your responsibility to educate us. That's hard for me to understand. Well, if a book is written, then you have every incentive and opportunity to read what's already been provided. So I think somebody else said back in the comments, like, I enjoy having this reciprocal education as a person of color. I know I'm going to have to share. We've been in events before where, white women say, I'm really scared because I don't want to burden people of color. But then we've had women of color in this space to say, I want to share. I want to be asked. Like, don't put me into that monolith of Black women who don't want to talk about this and who don't want to teach you, because I'm here and I want to talk about it and I want to teach you. If there's a book or if there's an event like this, that's an invitation to learn and to be educated. So you can consume all of that on your own. Yseult and I met at an event about race between women, and I was so scared to take up space as a white woman in a Black space. Even though the event was called Bridging the Empathy Gap Between White Women and Women of Color, when I went, I was just totally silent. And I was scared. I didn't want to, quote, take up space, because I'd heard that that was the wrong thing to do. But what I was ignoring was that this was an event to come together, to have conversations. And so I was kind of hiding, and Yseult actually came out and said, where are all the white women? Why aren't they here? Why aren't they in the ring talking with us about this? So spaces like this are an invitation for you to learn, and books are an invitation for you to learn. I would say, don't go up to your, person of color, your best friend who's a person of color, or your colleague, and say, can you teach me? I think that's the difference.
Yeah, and I think it goes to the idea that you can't see people of color as a monolith. Like, it's not because you have decided, and it's also because, like, if you think about this as trauma, you can see that, like, when someone has gone through something traumatic, it's hard to imagine that I'm gonna go, if Hannah experienced something traumatic, I'm not gonna go to Hannah and be like, I learned about this, can we talk about this? It's going to take like a genuine, there has to be the idea of being genuine, like decent human being, and being genuine as well. It's like, I'm never gonna go walk up to someone and be like, I'm learning about this, I'm on a journey, do you wanna talk about it? She's like, not everyone is in that space to want to talk about it. Like, I'm me. When I say us, by the way, I don't represent all Black women. I speak as me, Yseult, that's being in this space right now and has created a whole company that does this. This is me as an individual. I am one person. And so it's important to individualize in the people and to see them as like a person. And if you want to engage, it's just like anything else. You ask someone, are you comfortable? Do you want to talk about this? And some people are super comfortable about it. And me, I'm super comfortable at times, and sometimes I don't want to talk about it. So I'm like, listen, I don't want to talk about it outside of this setting because I'm exhausted and I want to rest mentally and emotionally. So it's like, it's really going back to being able to interact with people on a like a normal way. Like, that's how you go about anything else. This is not very different. If someone wants to talk about what they've experienced, you should at least say, hey, I'm learning about this. How do you feel about this? Can we talk about this? Some people will say yes. And when they say no, you have to absolutely be okay with that reality. You have to be okay with the idea that people of color don't want to talk about it too. Not everyone wants to talk about it, and when they don't want to talk about it, we have to be okay with it, because that's the whole idea of, it's not our job. Because what happens is, what I've experienced a lot before doing this work is, I've had people come to me and say, so hey, Yseult, like, can we, I want to talk about, and it's like, wait a minute, what? No, I don't. This is not the moment. I don't want to talk about this, because it's a draining and emotional, like, reviving of trauma that I've experienced. And so, like, why would I open up? And why would I open up to anyone? Like, I'm going to talk about this with people that I'm very, very close to, because I feel safe and vulnerable enough to open up. Not to anyone that just because they want to be on a journey. There's books, there's documentaries, and then there's your own friends to talk about this,
Mm-hmm. Shani's comment, a note about BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. We use it because it's easy to sum us up, but it's not easy to sum us up. And we shouldn't be summed up. We are all of our identities, and we should not be afraid to take space. We are Black, Jamaican, Trinidadian, Latinx, Dominican, Puerto Rican, Cherokee, Pawnee, Apache, South Asian, Pakistani, Iranian, Indian, East Asian, Chinese, Korean, Southeast Asian, Vietnamese, African, Nigerian, Sudanese, Malayan, and more. Let's not limit ourselves. People are already trying to do that. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for saying that. It's true. I struggle, there's always language that's evolving, and BIPOC seems to be the thing that most people are using and most people are comfortable with to encompass, but you're 100% right. It can't possibly sum up how people identify, and we need to honor the individuals that we're working with. So thank you for presencing that. Sophie, thank you, Melanie, for sharing those resources. Sophie asks, how can we do a better job in our anti-racist work considering intersectionality with Black and Brown, LGBTQIA+ folks, disabled folks?
I talk about this work as like a huge mountain that people need to like, that people are looking up and feel overwhelmed about. And it's like there's so much that we need to address. But I think that you have to start where you feel the most comfortable. And obviously in speech, be inclusive. It's like, you know, when we talk about POCs, but like we are including the LGBTQ because myself, I'm gay. And it's like all of that is it's part of like the conversation that we're having. And we kind of cater it to like the people that we're around, but it's absolutely part of it. And as long as you're not having speech that is exclusive, because that happens more often than we think, it's like I think that is the most important step that you take. It's like start where you are, see where you feel the most comfortable, and then embed yourself and creating a space where we can talk about all of it. We can talk about like all the minorities that need to be addressed, for all like the LGBTQ and the disabled, and like all of that has to be put on the table. But I think the first step would be to like address where people feel the most comfortable and creating a really a space where we can talk about it.
Mm-hmm. There's this great paper by Kimberly Crenshaw that was written in the 1980s. She was the one who coined the term intersectionality. And she has this really great analogy in that paper about lifting up those on the bottom lifts everybody else up. And I think sometimes going to the most marginalized communities lifts the whole, because I think when you're helping those communities, that's collective liberation for everybody. And we had a woman, a Black trans woman, on our podcast, and she, you know, there's so much discrimination and hierarchy in the LGBTQ community alone, usually where it's Black trans women at the bottom and white gay men at the top. And there's a lot of discrimination down that hierarchical scale. So lifting up, for example, Black trans women, according to her, helps lift the whole community, the whole LGBTQ community. So I think thinking about it in those terms can be helpful. Sophie, hopefully that answers your question. And like Yseult said, I think like I went to this intersectionality workshop a couple of years ago, and they had us rank where we're at on our allyship journeys, you know, whether we're an unaware ally, we're an aware ally, we're an accomplice, we're a co-conspirator, we're an advocate for every group. So going back to what we said in the beginning about allyship not being this blanket statement where just because you have like a white gay best friend doesn't mean that you're an ally to the LGBTQ community. You might be an ally to the G, but not to the T. Like we need to be honest with where we're at in our acceptance and our awareness and our stereotypes and our reflexive racism against all groups, and be really honest about that. We have shortcomings, Yseult and I do. Like we had new intentions this year for 2021 to use more inclusive language and pronouns, and to center addressing anti-Semitism in our work. We're constantly evolving in our work. We don't assume that people think we're in an inclusive space just because we talk about anti-racism. That doesn't necessarily mean that we include everybody. So we try to be extremely clear about where we're at in our journeys, and be as explicit as possible and say that as often as possible. Can't just say it once, like, I'm an ally, check. You need to show it and say it always.
Yeah. And be open to people pointing out that you're having a shortcoming in a conversation. I think that's really important. It's if you're not seeing a group, or you haven't noticed a group, or you're not giving attention to it, it's really important to be honest about that and be open. I think that that's the thing. There's a lot of ego when it comes to this work, especially from white people, where like they feel as though if we have to criticize, then they go in this alert mode of like, oh my God, I'm a racist now. And it's just like, no, like most people that I have encountered in my life are people that they're not KKK people. They're not like extremist right people. Like there are people that are really cool that I'm friends with, but I've had issues with, and I've even dated where I'm just like, whoa, you know, that's like, you're not seeing something that you should be seeing, or we should have a conversation. And what makes the whole situation different is how you really take that in, and how you decide to digest that and like respond to it. And so that's why white fragility is a thing, because unfortunately we experience it as a person of color. You know what that looks like, you know what that feels like. It feels like gaslighting, it feels like, you know, minimizing and an erasure of your experience, where, like I said earlier, if anyone needs to know how that looks like, it's the person that's like saying, hey, this is kind of weird. So it's really about staying open and not playing on like defending who you are as an individual, I think.
Right.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was just going to jump in and say students are probably going to head to class soon, but feel free to close up, and thank you everyone for coming.
Oh, thank you everyone for coming. I'm going to put our email address because we didn't get to every single question. So our email is hello@kinswomenpodcast.com, and our website is kinswomenpodcast.com. You guys can follow us. You can listen to our podcast. We love being here. We could talk to you guys for hours, and we're so grateful to SIPA and SSOC for hosting us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us into this space, Yvette. It was such a journey to get here. And Shani, and I don't want to forget Mackenzie. It was so nice to be able to build a conversation around this, and to be in this setting, I think gives me hope personally. And I find solace that, you know, the work that we do may help advance something or someone. And you guys are the future, like the great minds of our future. And like, I would hope that you take in this as not like a resolution, but maybe a step towards finding yourself into that journey, but absolutely being part of that journey. Like, do something. You would have the power, you would have the intellect, and you can make such a difference. So I have great hope, and I feel super privileged to be into this space with all of you.
I'm so grateful. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm going to stop the recording.